Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome to Point of View. I'm Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby Anderson today. And we have a full show for you, which you'd expect because so many things are happening out there in the world right now. We're going to start out with our longtime friend, Dan Pilla, to talk about Trump's taxes. President Trump the New York Times has released a story, not the taxes, they say they've got President Trump's tax returns for the past 20 years. They've discussed that and raised certain questions about that. So we're going to go to Dan Pilla, tax expert extraordinaire, to talk about that. We may also talk a little bit about Joe Biden's taxes. He's getting praise from the media for what he's done. There may be some other things in there he hasn't highlighted. And then a little later on in this hour, we'll talk about President Trump testing positive for the COVID-19. He's been criticized as having a slow response on the COVID-19 pandemic, with implications that a Democrat would have done it better. I'll raise the question as to whether or not Trump has done a bad job and whether or not we should expect a Democrat would have done it better. In our second hour, we'll turn to a big issue right now: Christians engaged in politics. We'll talk with Bunni Pounds of Christians Engaged about how Christians should be addressing politics, and then we'll turn to Tom Nelson, pastor at Denton Bible Church. Tom has been preaching on this subject, and he'll give some thoughts as to how Christians should be responding. So let's start out this hour going to our good friend Dan Pilla. Dan, are you there?
I am here, Merrill. How are you?
Welcome back to the show, Dan. You've been involved for over 3 decades with taxpayers' rights and defense of them. You and I think we've been talking for nearly that time, because you've been on Point of View for over 3 decades, off and on, as Marlon, Kirby, and others have come to you with questions about taxes. You've got 14 books out there, dozens of research papers. You've been on virtually every major television and radio program and in the newspapers. So thank you for joining us again. I wanted to reach out to you because in the past week or so, the New York Times came out with a story saying that they had gotten roughly 20 years of President Trump's tax returns, and they want to make the case that in most years, he didn't pay any taxes. In a couple of years, I think 2016, 2017, they say he paid about $750 in taxes, personal income taxes. They didn't get him for 2018 and 19, so we don't know what's going on right there. But they're making claims, and of course, in that the Democrats really picked up on this because they want to make the case that the tax system is unfair, that wealthy people don't end up paying a lot of taxes, lower income people get and middle income paying most of the taxes, and the wealthy need to pay more. But there's sort of this hidden note here that President Trump is either not being honest with the income he's making, or he's actively cheating on his taxes. So I wanted to come to you to raise the question how a business person, especially one involved in real estate, and real estate has a lot of implications for its taxes, give us your thoughts on what's happening with the accusations targeted President Trump.
Well, first of all, let me put it to you this way: we don't know what the New York Times has.
Right.
All right, I've gone through this article, and they talk about tax documents, and they talk about supporting information and so on, but they don't make it perfectly clear, at least in my opinion, at least certainly not from a litigation standpoint, Merrill, as to what we might point to in a tax court case, for example, as to what those documents might be. So we just don't know what they have or what they don't have. I find it odd that the Times article says that the information came from perfectly legal sources, but that seems a little bizarre to me too, because for the last couple of years, as you well know, the House Ways and Means Committee has had a lawsuit pending trying to get the Trump tax documents. And New York State Prosecutor Cyrus Vance has been pushing for in court for over 2 years, 3 years to get Trump's tax documents, and they haven't been able to do it through the court process. All right, so I'm really quite curious as to what the Times source is for these documents that they claim to be tax documents. All right, so that's the first question right off the bat: is what do they have? This we don't know. Secondly, as far as the substance of your question is concerned, but Donald Trump is a real estate developer. All right, he purchases raw land, he develops it into condos and golf courses and hotels. We all know that. There's no mystery there. The fact of the matter is that there is a designation in the Internal Revenue Code that allows certain real estate developers to offset other income with losses that non-real estate professionals simply are not able to use. All right, and these provisions of the law, Merrill, were put into the tax code in 1986. All right, there were changes to the code in 1986 that allowed this to happen. So all we can do is speculate. It's important for your listeners to understand that all we can do is speculate as to what the actual information in the true tax returns is, and is it possible that a person with billions of dollars of gross receipts pays no personal income taxes? Well, yeah, it's humanly possible, but we got to think about it in this context. Donald Trump has hundreds of businesses that are generating that income, corporations, partnerships, and so on. All of the gross, for example, if he's got, let's just say he's got 5 hotels in Corporation A. Well, Corporation A would file a tax return. Merrill, Corporation A would report the income from would report the gross receipts from the income stream. Corporation A would report the expenses on that tax return, and if the expenses offset the income, which is humanly possible, there's no question about that, there would be no bottom line profit to flow through to the individual shareholder, which we would assume would be the president or whatever other investors were involved with Corporation A. There could be dozens of investors. We don't know that, and so it's so difficult to speculate about this stuff without having the actual tax returns in front of your face. And the other thing I find bizarre about the Times article is what so-called experts reviewed this information, reviewed these documents, and analyzed these documents. I don't know anything about this article. This author, I should say. Doug Mills is the author of the article. I don't know what his background is. Is he trained to review tax returns? Merrill, I've testified in federal court as an expert witness to federal judges in interpreting federal income tax returns, all right? So, I know what I'm looking at when I look at a tax return, and I can take a layman through a tax return and make that person understand what that return is all about. And so, it's impossible to do that when you're just speculating about numbers, the veracity of which we have no clue.
When we come back after the break, we're going to continue our discussion with Dan Pilla about President Trump's tax returns and whether or not somebody who released this may have actually done it illegally. In other words, somebody may have broken the law. Representative Kevin Brady wants to know if that's the case, because there may be charges to be held against somebody if they can find out who did it. So stay with us. We'll be back in just a minute with Dan Pilla.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
When the Trump administration decided to cancel federal training sessions on critical race theory, you knew there would be criticism. What may be surprising is how easy it might be to respond to that criticism. For example, deans of the University of California Law School signed an open letter criticizing President Trump and his administration. And then Michael Brown wrote an open letter to these professors. Here are his first 2 points in his lengthy letter. First, the professors say they write with one voice. Brown asked whether such a unity of opinion should trouble you. Nearly all professors in the humanities and social sciences at American universities are left-wing. He also quotes one law professor who talks about how descriptions on positions were rewritten when the best applicants were right of center. No wonder these deans can speak with one voice. The liberal progressive voice is usually the only one allowed. Second, they complained that Trump decided to ban federal employees from learning about critical race theory through trainings. Brown responds that any federal worker can buy copies of White Fragility and meditate on the book over the weekend. Why should citizens of the U.S. pay to train federal employees in a controversial theory? Here's an even more relevant question. Why should we even be teaching critical race theory when it rests on neo-Marxist ideas? Lest you think that is too strong a statement, I would recommend that you take a moment and read one of the many articles being written by evangelical Christians on this race theory. Pastor John MacArthur has written about the theological errors of critical race theory. Professor Doug Groothuis also provides a powerful critique of critical race theory. We shouldn't be teaching this race theory and certainly shouldn't have U.S. taxpayers paying for it. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back. This is Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson today, and we have on the line Dan Pilla, one of the country's leading tax experts, to talk about Trump's taxes and whether or not he should have paid more, because the New York Times released a story saying that he didn't pay much or anything over the last 20 years. You know, Dan, I've heard people in the past, authors of stories or books, say they sold the rights to their story or their book to a Hollywood studio. A movie was made, and the author was supposed to get some kind of residual, some kind of royalties after the studio ended up making a profit. And the studio ended up making millions and millions of dollars off the film, but they claimed for tax purposes that they really didn't make anything, and the author was complaining that he or she thought that I should be getting some money from that because they made millions of dollars off the movie, but they're claiming for tax purposes that didn't actually make any money.
Well, what happens is, you might have millions of dollars of gross revenue, Merrill. There's certainly, that's certainly possible. But by the time you factor all the expenses in, the net profit is relatively small. Now, here's the other thing you got to keep in mind, and this is particularly true in the case of a real estate developer. There's such a thing as depreciation. Right. Now, depreciation is not a true out-of-pocket expense. It's a paper expense, but it's a legitimate 100% legal and proper deduction on a tax tax return. Anybody that purchases tools and equipment or property or buildings or so forth that is necessary to produce income has a right to depreciation. And any smart business person, any accountant in the country understands how depreciation works, and there's no accountant that's not going to advise his client to take the full amount of depreciation that's available. And in fact, there's two types of deductions that are available under the code, Merrill, when it comes to purchasing tools, equipment, property, and so on. The first is depreciation. When we're talking about a building like a hotel or a small office building, it doesn't make any difference. You're entitled, the owner, the purchaser is entitled to depreciate that property. That is to say, recover the cost of that property over time. When we're talking about commercial property, usually the span is 20 to 39 years, depends on what it is. So you take the cost of the property and you spread it over that depreciation period. The other type of deduction that's available is a so-called 179 deduction, and it's named after Code Section 179, which allows you to actually write off to expense in the year of purchase property that qualifies that otherwise would have to be depreciated. So, for example, if a business person goes in to their office and they refurnish their office with new furnishings, with new phone equipment, with new copy machines and computers, etc., normally that equipment has to be depreciated over its useful life, but this Code Section 179 allows you to expense it all in 1 year up to a certain limit, and that limit bounces around from year to year. Democrats want to eliminate that provision of the tax code, but Merrill, this has been in the law for 30 years, 40 years. This is not new stuff. There's nothing new about this, and the fact of the matter, and here's the other thing we got to wrap our heads around. The fact of the matter is high-income taxpayers pay most of the income taxes in the United States. This claim that rich people pay no taxes, Merrill, is demonstrably false. All right, U.S. Treasury data established very clearly not only do high-income earners in America pay federal taxes, they pay the majority of these taxes. Mm-hmm. All right. The fact of the matter is in 2014, just for example, this is Treasury data I have right now. In 2014, the top 1% of income earners paid 40% of all federal taxes that were paid in America, and the top 5% paid more than 60% of all federal taxes. Merrill, so to say that the high-income people pay no taxes is just absolutely not true.
And if I remember correctly, roughly half of the country under the median income pays about 3% of total taxes, federal income taxes?
If you draw the line at median income, Merrill, which is approximately $38,000 a year per individual, about $54,000 per family. If you draw the line at median income, those below median income pay no taxes. All right, so all of the taxes being paid in America are being paid by the top 50% of income earners, and 60% of all the taxes are paid by the top 5% of income earners. The top 10% of income earners pay 70% of all the federal income. To Merrill, it's demonstrably false to say that rich people pay no taxes.
We also had a recession come in 2007 that really hit the country hard. The actual recession went from 2007 to 2009, but the trailing effect from that went for several years into President Obama's administration, when he was not doing things that I would argue would have actually helped the economy move forward. Sure. In that time frame, I assume it's highly possible that a number of Trump's properties actually lost money because many people didn't have that discretionary income to be able to go and travel, go to the golf courses and other things that he has.
Well, not only is that true, Merrill, but there's another factor here. And that is to the extent that property is sold at a loss. Let's talk about what you mentioned are the operating expenses. Mm-hmm. All right, so you operate at a negative. Our gross receipts are $100,000, but our expenses are $120,000, and so now we've got an operating loss. First of all, when you incur an operating loss in a given year, you are allowed to carry that loss forward to offset future income. All right, so hypothetically, if Trump lost, let's just pick a number and say it's $1 billion in 2010. He's allowed to offset that $1 billion worth of losses going forward against other income. All right, that's just an absolutely basic principle in the tax code that's been in the law forever. Here's the other thing. Let's say Trump sold property at a loss, and this happened literally millions of times during the period from 2007 to 2012, where business people, individuals for that matter, investors, all kinds of people were selling property at a loss. All right, so let's say you buy a building for $1 million and you have to dump it for $500,000. Okay, you've got a $500,000 loss. That's called a capital loss because we're talking about a capital asset here, a structure, a building, right? That loss can also be carried forward, Merrill, and offset other income to a certain extent and other capital gains to a certain extent. So these things are basic fundamental principles of our tax law. They are not loopholes. They're not secret strategies. Every accountant that is worth a nickel knows about this stuff. There's no accountant with any sense, Merrill, that's going to allow a client to not take advantage of these legal, proper strategies to reduce their tax liability when those opportunities arise based on the facts and circumstances of the case. To say that somehow Trump or any high income person is taking quote unquote unfair advantage of the law, they're gaming the system. It's nonsense, Merrill. It's no different than any one of your listeners writing off, taking a deduction for their mortgage interest, their real estate taxes, and their charitable contributions. It's a perfectly legal strategy to claim a deduction, and everybody knows it's legal to write off your mortgage interest.
If these were actual tax forms that were released or leaked to the New York Times, my assumption is that's probably if somebody had access to that, that's probably illegal actions, is it not?
If somebody smuggled that information out of Trump's financial office or out of his tax lawyer or tax accountant's office, Merrill,
could it come from the IRS
yeah,
also? Could it be somebody at the IRS?
It could have been leaked by the IRS. Again, we don't know this. We're just speculating.
Right.
And that would be a felony on the part of whoever in the IRS leaked that information.
You know, there was a time several years ago when we would think that normally you could trust the FBI, the IRS, and other things not to do those kinds of things, but the deep state has proven that you can't necessarily trust them. So we don't know where it came from, and we don't know what the New York Times has. I've noticed that they haven't paid a lot of attention to Joe Biden's taxes, though there are some articles out there which highlights that he created a company and he took his royalties from his books and so forth and funneled that money through the company, in essence tax sheltering it from some of the taxes that he would otherwise have to pay if he just did it as an individual income.
Yeah, it's astonishing. Now, I haven't read that particular article, but I'm not surprised, Merrill, that stuff comes to light. You know, here's the thing. When Donald Trump took office as president of the United States, we knew he was a billionaire. We knew that he spent 40 years. We knew that his father, 40 years in the real estate development business. We knew his father was in real estate development. We knew that family made a fortune. Okay, fine. As far as I know, all right, I don't know Trump personally. I've never spoken with the man. I certainly haven't looked at his books and records. As far as I know, he hasn't stolen the money. All right, so if he's earned it lawfully and peacefully, then God bless him. He earned the money, no problem. I have no problem.
When we come
Here's
back,
what I don't.
Hold that just a second. We're going to come back in just a second. And if you want to know more about Dan Pilla, you can go to taxhelponline.com. That's where that's his website. You can find out more about him, or if you need to reach out to him. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about Joe Biden, but we'll also ask the question, what kind of tax reform would address this issue so that we didn't have these questions coming up? So stay with us and we'll be back.
"2020. It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kirby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome back. This is Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby today. And we have online with us Dan Pilla, one of the country's top tax experts. You can find out more about him at taxhelponline.com. That's his website. If you need to, there's information there, but you can also reach out to him there if you need to. Dan, what I was talking about with Joe Biden, Richard Rubin had a piece in the Wall Street Journal back in July, and Chris Jacobs had one in the Federalist on September 30. I know Chris. He used to be, if I remember correctly, he was a staffer with the House Ways and Means Committee, but he's no longer there in the government. But he wrote in the Federalist that the Bidens had set up two companies that they funnel some of this money through, and what he says was that in 2017, the total wages paid on the on Joe and Jill Biden's tax return was $245,000, but the corporate tax profits, total corporate tax profits, $10 million from his book. And by running it through the corporation there, he avoided, according to Chris, in 2017, $291,000 in Medicare taxes and $90,000 in Obamacare taxes. And of course, and then it's less for 2018 and even less for 2019. But that's running $10 million through a shell corporation in order to avoid for 2017 $381,000 in Medicare taxes and Obamacare taxes. And of course, it is the Obama-Biden health care law that he's avoiding the taxes on.
Isn't that astonishing? Now, if we can take that at face value, and again, I haven't seen Biden's tax returns any more than I've seen the president, so I don't know that. But
Biden has released those.
Okay, but I haven't seen them.
Right.
And so I don't know. Let's just take at face value what you say. What happens in a situation like that, Merrill, is that an individual will transfer an income stream to a corporation,
right,
allow the corporation to pay all the bills, take the net income as a dividend from the corporation as opposed to a self-employment income stream, and that's how you avoid the Social Security tax. By the way, it's not legal. All right, if the IRS looks at that, they're going to likely take the position that if the income is earned through personal services such as that, writing a book and distributing a book and all those types of things, then that that's the individual's income.
I've known a number of seniors who, once they turn 65 and they're still working, they want to be able to take Medicare. They don't want to have to pay the extra taxes on Medicare if you have higher income and other things. So they would create, for lack of a better term, a shell organization, and whoever they were working for paid the shell organization, and then they paid the person, say, the minimum wage. This is often done through families and so forth. So the person's not showing much income at all, but the corporation is making money, and I assume that's perfectly legal, and a number of people do it.
Well, a lot of people do it. There's no doubt about that. But here's what the problem is, and in fact, it's a huge problem, and it's one of the problems that I talk about in my new book, Dan Pilla's Small Business Tax Guide, which is a guide to helping people stay out of trouble with the IRS. I got a chapter in that book that talks about this very issue, that talks about the requirement under federal law to pay a person a salary that's commensurate with the fair market value of their services. So you can't just, if you're performing services for a corporation, Merrill, let's say, for example, that I called you up and said, Merrill, I want you to come up here and I want you to work for my company, and I want you to work for $1,000 a month. All right, you're probably not likely to do that. All right, you're obviously worth far more than $1,000 a month. If you went out into the market to sell your services to some other company to do the same thing, you'd certainly command much more than $1,000 a month for your expertise and your knowledge and your background and so forth, right? And so that's the kind of relationship you have to have with your own corporation. There has to be a salary that's commensurate with the fair market value of the services. In other words, what would it cost you to go out into the marketplace to bring somebody in to perform the services that you are performing? And if it would cost more than what you're paying, then the IRS is going to they're going to impute additional. What they're going to do, Merrill, is they'll take the dividend distribution and they'll reclassify that as wages, and they'll require you to pay the employment taxes on it.
So let's ask the question: can we resolve some of these issues if we were to move to a true flat tax? I know when Dick Armey was Speaker of the House, he went around giving lectures on this, and his motto was "Stay flat or die." He wanted to have a high standard deduction. If I remember right, it was like $35,000, $45,000, and a flat tax. I can't remember what his rate was above that, but a flat tax on everything above that. Is if we move to something like that, would we address some of these problems?
Well, you wouldn't address any of them. First of all, I remember the Army flat tax stuff very well because I was a part of that. And what happened is Army went around the country, and we did debates around the country on the question of whether we should adopt a flat tax or a national resale.
I think Bill Archer, who was also was on the Ways and Means Committee, and Bill was for a sales tax and a national sales tax, right. and Army was the flat tax person.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I worked with Archer very closely and others, Billy Tozan out of Louisiana and some others on the sales tax end of it. And I can't tell you how many hundreds of radio shows I did on the desirability of a national retail sales tax, including testifying before Archer's committee on the idea, all right, as well as testifying before Archer's Senate Finance Committee on IRS abuse issues. So I'm well familiar with this stuff. And in my opinion, Merrill, bottom line is this, very quickly, very simply, the only way to eliminate all of these problems and all of these so-called, quote-unquote questionable strategies and so forth, loopholes, et cetera, the only way to do that is bulldoze the entire Internal Revenue Code, abolish it lock, stock, and barrel, and go to a national retail sales tax on all consumption goods and services. That makes it simple. It makes it clean. It eliminates the IRS. It eliminates all this accounting nonsense that we're questioning. Every 4 years we question this accounting nonsense. Okay, fine, let's abolish it all.
I live in Texas, and Texas doesn't have a state income tax. It just has a sales tax, and I love it because we don't have to fill out any Texas income tax information. We just pay the sales tax when we go along. But my concern about the sales tax has always been if you go to the national. So if you have Texas and you have Texas and the national, and given Congress's free spending proclivities, it would have to be a fairly substantial sales tax to try to address all that. If you start getting in the neighborhood of 20 or 25% sales tax, aren't you sort of creating this incentive for people just to sort of bypass that because it is so high? It's not clear to me that if we get to 20 or 25%, people won't start looking for a lot of ways to try to bypass that.
Well, and certainly that's a concern, Merrill, no doubt about it, and that is one of the objections that's raised, and it's a valid concern. Here's what the issue is, though. The one of the things that drives non-compliance with taxes is complexity. I mean, that is the number one thing on the list that tax administrators will tell you. The simpler the tax, the easier it is to comply with, the more people will, in fact, comply. When it comes to an income tax, it's massively complicated, no question about that. And if you're going to hide income, it only takes one person to participate in that chicanery, all right? So if you've got somebody that's paying you in cash, you don't need their permission to keep that cash off your tax return. If you've got some means of manipulating your income and your expenses, you don't need somebody else's participation to do that. When we're talking about a sales tax, it requires two parties to avoid the tax, the seller and the buyer. All right, and sellers still are responsible to make their reports, file their tax returns, et cetera, pay the tax. They don't have an incentive, Merrill, to help you cheat on your sales taxes because the seller is not paying the tax. The seller's collecting the tax and paying it over to the government. So you don't have the fundamental tools you need to cheat on the sales tax. The mechanism is not there.
My guest has been Dan Pilla. He's a tax expert who's been on Point of View for more than 3 decades now, going back as long as I've been associated with the organization. You can find out more about him at taxhelponline.com, taxhelponline.com. Dan, if they're interested in your book for small businesses on tax help for small business, they can find that at information about that at your website, can they not?
Yeah, that's exactly right. The book is Dan Pilla's Small Business Tax Guide. It's brand new. It's going to help you stay out of trouble with the IRS. Go to taxhelponline.com to get more information.
Thank you so much for joining us, Dan.
My pleasure, Merrill. Thanks for having me.
When we come back after the break, I'm going to talk a little bit about whether or not Trump was slow in responding to the pandemic, and could a Democrat have done a better job at that? Now that the president has tested positive for COVID-19, there's been a lot of sort of hee-hawing among people saying if he had actually taken this seriously from the beginning, he might have resolved this. There would be fewer deaths and so forth. I'm going to look at that and we'll answer the question, would a Democrat have done a better job handling the pandemic? We'll be back in just a minute.
Now, back to Point of View. your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back. Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson. And let's talk a little bit about whether or not a Democrat would have done a better job of managing the pandemic. In his acceptance speech for the Democratic National Convention, Joe Biden implied that if a Democrat if he had been in charge, he would have had a plan right there immediately. They would have listened to the experts. They would have addressed all the problems. Millions of people would have not contracted the virus, apparently, and thousands fewer would have died from that. Is that a reasonable thing to think? Let me start out by saying when you have a novel virus, a new virus come out, the scientists don't necessarily know what that virus is going to work like, how it's going to respond, how easily it's going to spread, how contagious it will be, how difficult it will be on people, and actually how it will affect people. They just don't know. There are other coronaviruses. COVID-19 is a coronavirus. There are others. SARS from the early 2000s, about 2002, 2003, that was a coronavirus. MERS, Middle East respiratory virus. That was a Middle East respiratory syndrome is what they call it. Notice they did call it from the Middle East. They identified where it came from in that, but that was around 2012, I think. Both of those were coronaviruses. There were some deaths. There were contagions, but it was much, much lower than what we saw with COVID-19. So there was some expectation that this would be similar. It would probably expand through some countries. It would be caught by some people. There would be some deaths, but it was thought it would not be nearly what it was right now. So it took everybody by surprise. I think looking back, Trump would easily say, or the administration's mistakes were made, but almost anybody would have made those mistakes. So the first question you want to ask is, do we have any reason to believe that a Democrat would have been better at handling? So let me start out by saying they passed the Affordable Care Act in 2010. It went online for the insurance portion came available in 2014, beginning of 2014. The website went up in October 2013. So they had 3.5 years from 2010 to October 2013 in order to be able to get the website up and running for the Affordable Care Act. It was an absolute disaster. It was a terrible job. They had to bring experts in afterwards to try to troubleshoot the thing and figure out what was wrong. And it took months to get the website actually up and running well. So if a Democrat says we would have done a better job, you have to ask the question, why didn't you do a better job just getting a website up and running? That was an easy thing to do. There were already websites up that provided health insurance that people could go in, put in their zip code, put in their ages and so forth, and they could see health insurance available in their area from a range of different countries and what those policies covered. But they didn't do it correctly there. But they are still making accusations about what the president did. They said his response was too slow. I think it probably wasn't actually too slow, given, number one, we didn't know exactly how contagious this was going to be. And when they began to realize it was going to be pretty contagious, they acted fairly quickly. On March the 2nd, Governor Cuomo of New York gave a press conference, and he said, this is not a problem. We're going to be able to handle this. Don't worry about it. We've got this under control. That didn't necessarily turn out to be the case. Shortly thereafter, within just a few weeks, we found out that it was getting much worse. And by March the 13th, President Trump declared a national emergency. On March the 2nd, when Governor Cuomo of New York, gave his address saying, we've got this under control in New York, don't worry about it, on that same day, President Trump had the presidents of the CEOs of the major drug companies into the White House to discuss coordinating their efforts to make sure that a vaccine or a treatment was being worked on and was moving along quickly to find out what the federal government needed to do to help. So in 11 days, between March 2nd and March 13, when Trump declared a national emergency, that's not a lot of time to go from there's really no concern out there to a national emergency. In fact, on March the 2nd, there was only, I think there were 6 deaths in the country and about 90 cases in the country. So it did not look to be a major catastrophe at that time. By March the 13th, they had declared a national emergency. So I think you can easily say that, in fact, the president acted fairly quickly on this. Ironically, when the president banned travel to China on January 31st, Biden criticized that as being xenophobic. When the president banned travel to Europe in February, Biden criticized that as well. So it's interesting that they wanted to say that the president acted too slowly, and yet they criticized some of the actions that he took as being overwrought and not necessary. Second thing, he didn't listen to the experts. Now, the question we've had here is Democrats keep wanting to step up and say, I will listen to the scientists. I will listen to the experts. In fact, shortly after the Democratic convention, Joe Biden said if the experts recommend that he lock down the country, he would do it. It's not clear he has the authority to do that, but that's what he said. He's walked that back just a little bit. But the question, of course, is that this being a new virus, the experts, their opinions have changed over time. Joe Biden has said recently that he would require a mandate to wear a mask. But in January and February of this year, the experts were saying masks aren't necessary. The Surgeon General said, stop wearing masks. The head of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention said, masks are not helpful to you. You don't need those. It wasn't until towards the end of March that the experts actually flipped and said, you really should be wearing a mask, and we think you should be wearing it all the time when you're out in public and so forth. So if you were listening to the experts in January and February and even early March, you wouldn't be wearing a mask. It wasn't until after that that they decided the mask was necessary. So if Trump was critical or wondering about it, it's because the experts changed. The experts have changed their position on several things. He's concerned about the unemployment. Joe Biden said we've lost 50 million jobs. There have been a lot of jobs that have been lost in this, but that's because the governors shut down their economies. Whether you agree with or disagree with the governor shutting them down, it's the governors who took that step, not the president. The president provided guidelines and guidance, but the president did not shut down the economies. The reason you lost jobs is because governors, Republicans and Democrats, shut down their economies. That is not something that the president was responsible for. And, of course, there's the high death rate. There have been more people than we thought, not nearly as many as the early predictions. 2.2 million were the early predictions of deaths of U.S. citizens. It's over 200,000 now. But there's no reason to think that a Democrat would have actually done a better job in handling that either. The people who were in charge of it, Governor Cuomo being in charge of of New York, he opened the door so that COVID-19 patients could end up being transferred to the nursing homes and devastated the nursing home population. So I just don't think there's any real evidence that you could make the case that a Democrat running this would have done a better job. When we come back, we're going to shift gears. We're in election mode right now, and so we're going to ask the question, what is the role for Christian in politics? We're going to talk to Bunni Pounds with her organization, Christians Engage, which is trying to encourage more engagement among Christians. And after that, we'll talk to Tom Nelson, pastor of Denton Bible Church. He's been preaching on the subject, and he has some thoughts for us. So stay with us, and we'll turn to the topic of Christians and politics.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome to Point of View. I'm Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby Anderson today. And I'm really looking forward to this hour because we've got an election coming up in about a month. And it is very important that Christians are engaged in this. So in this hour, we're actually going to talk to the founder of a group called Christians Engaged. That's Bunni Pounds. And then at the bottom of the hour, we're going to shift over to Tom Nelson of Denton Bible Church, who has been preaching on this and gotten a lot of positive response on his preaching of how Christians should be involved in the government and in the society and the electoral process. Next hour, we're going to go to Carter Page. Carter Page is one of several people, campaign aides to Donald Trump, who the FBI targeted as sort of a deep state operation. But he won that battle. The others haven't been so as fortunate, at least not so far. And then we're also going to talk about health care reform. That's become a major issue in this campaign. And Grace Marie Turner of the Galen Institute is going to be talking about a letter sent to the Trump administration, signed by a number of free market economists, including me, on health care reforms that the government should be looking in the direction we ought to be going. So let's start out now with Bunni Page. We've had her on before, Bunni Pounds. We've had her on before to talk about her group, Christians Engaged. She was a graduate of Christ for the Nations Bible Institute and later Dallas Baptist University. She was the campaign manager for U.S. Congressman Jeb Hensarling for a number of years, one of our best congressmen, I would say. And then in 2015, she started Bunni Pounds and Associates, and she works with people running for office, but she has the sideline of Christians Engaged. Bunni, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Matthews. Great to be with y'all today.
We had you into the studio. It's been several months ago because you had recently started Christians Engaged. And I mentioned at the time, there was a time when the Christian Coalition was one powerful force in Washington and the country. I would, if I in the 90s, if I were going by visiting with members of Congress about some particular legislation that had to do with taxes or spending or something of that nature, they often said to me, have you checked with Ralph Reed and the Christian Coalition to see where they are on this? And the implication was, I want to know where they are before I support or oppose this thing because I don't want to get on the wrong side of the Christian Coalition. It was a very interesting dynamic that was going on. And the Christian when Ralph Reed left, I think the organization kept going. I think it still may be out there, but it just doesn't have the impact that it had at one point in time. And I think the country is the worse for it. We need an organization that is engaged, looking at issues that Christians turn to say, what do you think about this? Give us some information on it. But you started Christians Engaged as a sort of you're starting in Texas. I think you were going to expand it. Tell us what your vision was behind that organization.
Yeah, well, we started in December. That's when we were back on the show with you when we were launching. Myself and Tracy Bradford, who was the Texas Eagle Forum president, came on this initiative as my vice president. So we launched to really start being like the spiritual, political people that have been in the trenches for years and years, really going back to the church and saying, guys, we need reinforcements. It's time for the church to get off the sidelines, and it's time for us to start with just practical steps. And our heart has really been to go into churches, to talk to Christians around the state of Texas, and look for the ones that God is awakening in this hour. And I believe that there's a heart cry coming out of people that, oh, man, we have to do something to save America. If we didn't feel that 5 years ago or 10 years ago, we feel that today. So trying to locate those people, get them a message. Okay, it's time to pray for our city, state, and nation. It's time to pray for elected officials. It's time to seek God for our nation. But it's also time for us as Christians to be good citizens of America, to vote in every election, not just the general November election, but also city elections, school board elections. It's time for us to take Jesus into the ballot box with us. And it's also in time for us to engage with our culture and not just to sit on the sidelines waiting for Jesus to come back. But, you know, we believe that we as Christians should be the ones really standing up for the preborn. We should be the ones that are adopting foster care kids out of the foster care system. We should be the ones that are not letting Texas be the number 2 state for human trafficking. We should be the ones that are sitting in our city council meetings watching the dollars that they're running up in bond debt, right? So there's a lot of issues. Pretty much every issue in our culture is touched by the Bible. So really propelling the body of Christ to go back to the Bible and figure out what the Bible has to say about these issues and connecting the dots is really our vision.
When you mentioned bond debt and so forth, so what you're saying is that Christians come to the vote, they shouldn't just be asking about the social issues that matter to Christians. They should also be concerned about fiscal issues. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the Bible has so much to say about debt, about being good stewards of our resources. The same things that apply to us as individual people and families should also apply to government. And so there's so much, you know, we have a new on-ramp to political activism class that we've developed. We had 75 students in our first class around the state of Texas, and then just finished another segment of that. We're doing that again October 15. But we literally go through 12 to 15 issues and connect them to the Bible and say, we're not going to tell you how to believe, but we need to be a Berean and realize that the scriptures actually talk about many of the issues that we're dealing with, you know, even border issues, right? We have scriptures about nation states. We have scriptures about the boundaries of a nation, but we also have scriptures that talk about how to deal with the foreigners within our gates.
Now you can
there's lots of scriptures that we can go to on all those issues.
Yes, you can go to pointofview.net and you'll find information about Bunny there, also access to reach out to her. And what is the website for Christians Engaged?
Yeah, it's christiansengaged.org, O-R-G. Christians Engage with a D.
And you have a number of things there. Of course, you have pray, you have get active, and so forth. What are you? You mentioned that you've got some classes that you're setting. When we come back from the break, I'd like you to discuss a little bit, tell people a little bit more about those classes. Are they virtual or are they done in person?
Yeah, we have virtual classes. It's a real intensive 8-hour class for Christians to start getting involved in politics. We call it our on-ramp to political activism class for Christians. So
when we come back, I'd like you to explain how they can go about getting signed up for that and becoming engaged in that. And then we'll want to talk a little bit more about where the Christian movement should be going in an effort to try to have an influence on the country and on our elected officials to get them more attentive to our concerns and what we feel like the country should be considering, both in social and in economic issues, because both of them are important. My guest for this segment is Bunni Pounds. She'll be back with us so stay with us. We'll be back in just a minute.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
When
When the Trump administration decided to cancel federal training sessions on critical race theory, you knew there would be criticism. What may be surprising is how easy it might be to respond to that criticism. For example, deans of the University of California Law School signed an open letter criticizing President Trump and his administration. And then Michael Brown wrote an open letter to these professors. Here are his first 2 points in his lengthy letter. First, the professors say they write with one voice. Brown asked whether such a unity of opinion should trouble you. Nearly all professors in the humanities and social sciences at American universities are left-wing. He also quotes one law professor who talks about how descriptions on positions were rewritten when the best applicants were right of center. No wonder these deans can speak with one voice. The liberal progressive voice is usually the only one allowed. Second, they complained that Trump decided to ban federal employees from learning about critical race theory through trainings. Brown responds that any federal worker can buy copies of White Fragility and meditate on the book over the weekend. Why should citizens of the U.S. pay to train federal employees in a controversial theory? Here's an even more relevant question. Why should we even be teaching critical race theory when it rests on neo-Marxist ideas? Lest you think that is too strong a statement, I would recommend that you take a moment and read one of the many articles being written by evangelical Christians on this race theory. Pastor John MacArthur has written about the theological errors of critical race theory. Professor Doug Groothuis also provides a powerful critique of critical race theory. We shouldn't be teaching this race theory and certainly shouldn't have U.S. taxpayers paying for it. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back. Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby today. And on the line with me, Bunni Pounds, who is president of Christians Engaged and a political consultant. So, Bunni, tell us, how do people go and sign up for the training classes that you have? And what will I expect to learn from that class? And then once I learn it, how do I apply it?
Yeah, no, great question. You can go to christiansengaged.org and go to our event page. And if you go down there to October 15 is our next class. Mm-hmm. We do 2 hours on party politics and advocacy, why Christians should get involved, and we're from a nonpartisan perspective, of course. We do 2 hours on issues from a biblical perspective. We actually talk through issues and read scriptures based on issues, and kind of get people researching and figuring out which issues they like to study. Then we do 2 hours on how to be a Christian with integrity in the political movements. That's a whole can of worms, how to actually operate in the mudslinging as a believer, how to work with social media, how to forgive people, how to deal with persecution and suffering, all the fun stuff that we experience in politics.
And you do that in how many hours?
Yeah, and then we actually give you assignments and have the students go do something. Like, it's not our heart just to fill you with head knowledge, but to activate you. So, one of our students in our first class in August is now one of the vice presidents of a political party in his county because he went and actively volunteered and became, somebody that people are looking up to in that county. So we're seeing people get involved with the pro-life movement, whether it's a human trafficking initiative, adopting a candidate, going and volunteering for their local political party, whatever that looks like for them. But get activated, and then they come back and give us reports, either verbal or written reports, to kind of graduate from the class.
And
so it's a good beginning step for people.
And if it doesn't make any difference what denomination I'm in, or if I'm in a non-denominational church, that won't make any difference there, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. All from a non-denominational point of view. We've got Catholics, Protestants, Pentecostals, Charismatics, Southern Baptists, Methodists. It's been a great hodgepodge of people, and to have frank discussions with even within a class on Zoom of people that understand this is off the record. They can ask vulnerable questions and get answers, again, from a nonpartisan point of view, but pointing them in the right direction to start the process of getting involved politically, because if we can't just sit back any longer.
So the last time you and I talked, you had just started the organization. What's the reception been?
It's been really amazing. By the end of this year, we'll have been in 28 churches, either in Sunday morning services or Wednesday nights, doing programs. We have usually a headlining speaker, which could be me or Congressman Michael Cloud or State Representative Matt Schaefer, different people. And then we have panels with our board and our area leaders talking about prayer voting engagement. So people can see millennials, African Americans, Hispanics. They can see and hear people talk about those three principles and see themselves really as being a voice in this hour. So we're doing those kind of programs. We've had a couple conferences this year. Even with COVID, of course, we've done statewide prayer calls with elected officials so people can see that elected officials are real people, that actually some of them actually love God.
One time I was in a room with Rick Perry, and as governor, and he wanted to lead a prayer of a group of us, and it was a real prayer. It was not just a sort of standard say a few statements and let it go. He was doing some serious praying there.
Exactly. Yeah, we had former Governor Rick Perry on one of our calls, and you can see that on our YouTube channel as well. We recorded all of them, and the comfort that gave people in the middle of COVID was, we were really shocked at how much comfort people got in seeing that even though they knew their elected officials might not have all the answers, that they were seeking the right place for those answers. And so that provided a lot of comfort that we never really saw. Now, so, yeah, if you told me at the beginning of this year when we launched that we would be doing prayer calls and doing letters of hope and encouragement and sending spiritual care packages to all of our elected officials in Texas. We've done some crazy projects this year that I didn't have on my radar, but God knew that at the end of the day, we were supposed to minister back to the political class and tell them that God was there for them to provide hope.
Various groups produce a voter's guide on issues. Are you doing anything like that?
We have not launched into that yet. We have a 501c4, but we're not really actively using it at this point. Kind of just praying through on that. There are so many resources available. iVoter Guide, as you know, is a really good one here in Texas that we kind of refer people to. But at this point, we're trying to give people the practical information. Like our typical voter guide for the general election is going to be, go to your county website, elections department website, print off your ballot, look at the names, spend 2 or 3 or 5 minutes on each of their websites. Out of their own mouth, they're going to tell you what they believe. Look at what party they represent and the platform of that party, because unfortunately parties matter and values matter. And trying to communicate to people that it's not, God is all about the kingdom. It's not about the party, but it also is very much about the principles and values that people say they believe, because you and I know when they go to Washington or Austin, they're backing up a leadership and they're backing up principles that they say they believe, whether they say they're independent or not. At the end of the day, they're not really independent. And so making Christians understand that and realize that we're not just voting on who we want to have a Diet Coke with tomorrow. We're voting on not personalities, but on values. And, I wish Jesus was on the ballot. I so wish Jesus was on the ballot.
I'd vote for him.
And I would totally vote for him. But unfortunately, we're picking between very imperfect people, and we have to make those decisions as Christians And, we're not going to get it always right, but at least we're trying and we're building habits. The key is the word habit, building a habit of showing up at every election and doing enough research to have an educated vote and make those kind of choices.
Last December, you were, if I remember right, you were going to start in Texas and then with the hope that this would eventually expand to some other states. So tell me about any expansion that might be going on.
Yeah, well, we're actually looking a little bit at California right now. We've had some open doors out there.
The Lord's work in the devil's state.
Yeah, no, we're really trying to build a success story here in Texas. We just had a fundraiser with Rafael Cruz online. People can view that on our website.
Mm-hmm.
But State Representative Matt Krause out of Fort Worth, that's on our advisory board, laid out the idea that if we build something that's successful here, that starts building habits in believers that will transform our state, that success story in Texas will have a huge impact around the country. And people come to Texas looking for success stories and looking for things that work. And so we want to be one of those stories for the future for other people to pick up and go, hey, we want to do this in our state.
So Point of View goes out all over the country. If pastors or others out there are listening and they're interested in this, number one, how do they get in contact with you about this? And number two, are you open to opening to having some of the sessions, or can somebody from outside another state come in and listen to some of the sessions that you're doing?
Absolutely. And we have a nationwide podcast as well. Just interviewed David Barton, interviewed. We're doing anything from interviews of pastors that are actively politically active to educational materials for people. So, yeah, people can join our movement around the country. Just know that a lot of our election day information that we're sending out or things are related to Texas politics. But we're believing for investors to say, I want to start this in my state and, produce a system. Because what we're doing is when you take our pledge, christiansengage.org, I encourage everybody that listens to you to take our pledge to pray, vote, and engage. We actually have built a tool that will then remind you. We'll send you a text message with a scripture every Monday at 5:55 to remind you to spend 5 minutes in prayer for something outside of your life. We will remind you that today is the last day to register to vote and that early voting is starting soon. And we'll remind you on Election Day for every election, not just the November election. And so when we start doing that and building a tool that actually helps people engage in that way, we really believe that we can change some of the numbers of the demographics. Because right now, you and I know it's the 65 and older that are carrying the voting strength, at least in Texas for the most point.
Yes.
And so as we engage millennial Christians and we start really having people dig into the Bible, that starts with a Christian worldview. That if we start building that up with a habit of voting, that can really change the dynamic of what's going on.
Bunny, thank you so much for joining us. That's christiansengage.org, and you can find out more there. When we come back, we'll be turning to Tom Nelson to talk about his sermons on Christian activism.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome back. Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson today. And we're going to continue with our theme of the Christian involved in society and politics. With me for this half hour is Tom Nelson. He is the senior pastor of Denton Bible Church in Denton, Texas. He's been associated with the church now for 40 years. And he's a graduate of University of North Texas and Dallas Theological Seminary. And he's spoken to all kinds of groups out there, but lately he has turned his focus to the role of the Christian being involved in politics and what that role should look like as guided by the Bible. Tom, are you with me?
I am with you, Merrill. Ready to go.
Ready to go. Now, you have, for the past several weeks, you have been delivering sermons touching on the role, going to the Bible and looking at the role of the Christian involved in the society, in the culture,
right,
in government, and so forth. And you've clearly got a message. This is hitting you in ways that you're energized about this. Tell us what's driving you? What's moving you to do that?
I think, Merrill, when I was young, I never read a front page. I read the comics. I read the sports. I never read the front page. I never watched Walter Cronkite because it to me, everybody, Democrats, Republicans, we're all trying to head about the same direction, just by different means.
Mm-hmm.
But here in the last, I don't know how many years, there has come a continental shift, a worldview shift from theism, the Judeo-Christian worldview, to atheism, existentialism, humanism, secular humanism, to where from the Lord is my shepherd to I am my shepherd to nothing is my shepherd. And somehow it has divided, and I'm not sure, somebody ought to write a book on it as to why Republicans went the way of theism and Democrats went the way of atheism, because I know that Democrats for so long were committed to humanitarian things. And, I never told my mother till the day she died that I was a Republican because maybe it was because Roosevelt did so much for the country as a Democrat, but there has been a shift. And it's no longer simply voting for a Democratic Party or for a Republican Party or candidate. You're voting for a worldview that is so contrary to what America began with and so contrary to what works in reality. And so it was like, Merrill, that my children and my grandchildren were at risk now. David would say in one of the Psalms, "For the sake of my family and my friends, O Jerusalem, I will seek your good." That my family is at stake if God is not in charge. And so something has happened.
There was a day when you had both liberals and conservative Democrats and liberal and conservative Republicans, and oftentimes the liberals were siding, but things could be bipartisan in the sense that you could have either the liberals from both parties got together and the conservatives from both parties got together. But that has really, starting in the 1990s, that has switched, and now there's virtually no conservatives in the Democratic Party and no liberals in the Republican Party. And so what people sort of they're nostalgic for the bipartisanship. I don't know that there's any real difference. It's just the conservatives have moved to one side and the liberals have moved to another. And as a result, it seems like you've got the liberals pushing even further to the left and conservatives trying to hold things out. So what do you see are the key issues in this upcoming election? We're about 30 days out now, and you see this as a major turning point or potential turning point for the country.
Right. I did a message yesterday called Continental Collapse. 4 years ago, I did Continental Divide on how the Republicans and Democrats had divided essentially over theism and atheism. And now I just called it Continental Collapse because it's not the barbarians at the gate anymore. They're in seats of power. And so, as Eric Metaxas said 4 years ago, he said, if the Democrats win this election, the America you knew is gone. And he said it's not gone for 4 years or 8 years. It's gone. Because, of course, Supreme Court positions were about to be appointed and all others. And so I think the major deal, and we put out a voting guide that is nonpartisan. It's simply hard facts. Because I think a lot of times, Merrill, that liberalism runs under the canopy of apathy and ignorance. People just don't know or care. And so we put out a voting guide, nonpartisan, that simply says abortion. Here's Trump, here's Biden. Defunding, here is Trump, here is Biden. LGBT, the gay community, here is Trump, here is Biden, so that people can be very intelligently informed when they go into a voting booth, and not just with national, but the municipal, with the local election. Guys that are going to get to our kids.
Oh, yeah, because they end up, they oftentimes start at the school board or something of that nature. They move to the city council, then they move to the county commissioner, and then they run for state office or Congress. What does the Bible have to say about the role of we didn't have democracies or republics then, but the Bible still speaks to this. What does it say to it?
There are 4 fishermen that are the leaders of the church, in a sense, Peter, Andrew, James, John, and you see 4 centurions, and they're all honored. Some of them aren't even believers in the New Testament, 2 for Jesus, 1 for Peter, 1 for Paul, and they're all honored. That the Bible recognizes government all the way back to Genesis 9, the institution of government. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. Ministers are servants of God, devoting themselves to this very thing. Paul said, for this reason you pay taxes, because ministers are rulers are servants of God. It's like a tithe. And so the Bible recognizes the divinity of government as something that doesn't redeem man, but restrains man. And it works together with the church that redeems man. And so we have been given, maybe in other days, it was simply by your birth that you got into government. But now the Christian or anybody has been given a role in government to have a votive, to be a votary, to have a vote, an act of the will as to his expression of who he wants there. And if no longer can the Christian sit back and say things will work themselves out, if he does not express his vote, and if buddy, the 25 million Christians that did not vote in the last election, if they do not express themselves, the liberals will, and the government that we knew is going to be gone. I just heard Hal Lindsey the other night. He was just talking about how he wished that he could say to his grandchildren, let me tell you about the America that I grew up in. And that's kind of the way a lot of us are now.
So we've got a couple of minutes left before the break. Tell me, if somebody comes up to you and says, you're a pastor, you should not be involved in guiding people on politics or anything of that nature, what would be your response to that?
I would say that no longer is politics politics. When you're talking about the destruction of the unborn, the forcing of homosexuality on me, that I cannot be discretionary in who I want to hire, when you force on me systemic racism, that I am guilty because I'm a white heterosexual male, that's not politics, that's morality. When you let rioters go free, when you have illegal immigrants, when you have cities that are sanctuary cities that essentially have seceded from the Union, that's not an issue of politics. That is an issue of morality. If a guy breaks into my home, that's not an issue of politics. That's an issue of morality. And when it is going to get my children at the elementary level, that's not an issue of politics. That is war upon my soul To that, you have to speak.
My guest right now is Tom Nelson. He's the senior pastor of Denton Bible Church. We have information about him at our website, pointofview.net, and I believe we have a link to his sermon from yesterday that you can go there, and you'll be able to have access to that and watch it if you didn't earlier. So we're talking about the role of the Christian in the society, whether or not we should be engaged, to what extent we should be engaged. And Tom, when we come back, I'd like you to give us some hints as to what the Bible says we should think about as we go and cast our vote. What are those key things that a Christian should keep in mind as he or she goes into the voting booth and makes the choice for the politicians that are going to be guiding them and running them for the next several years? So stay with us. We'll be back in just a minute with Tom Nelson.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back. My guest for the rest of this hour is Tom Nelson, who's senior pastor of Denton Bible Church, and we're talking about the Christian being involved in politics and elections. You know, Tom, during the convention nights, I can't remember if it was Republican or Democratic, but CNN, I think you've called them the Canaanite News Network.
Yeah.
had Van Jones on there, and Van Jones was in the Obama administration early on. I think they were calling him a czar or something, but he ended up having to leave because I think some things were revealed that he was appreciative of socialism, let's just say. But I remember here at the during the convention, he mentioned about Christians. He said, there's a lot of us liberals who are Christians. I am a Christian. And I thought, Van, either we're reading the same Bible or we're getting something different out of it, because I don't know how you can be a socialist and be a Christian at the same time. Maybe you can, but what principles from the Bible what should the Christian be drawing out of there to guide their decisions?
What you say is so good, because the assumption of politics is God, that politics seeks to restrain evil and to let good men prosper. Peter said it's for the promotion of good men and the restraint of evil. And so that whenever a Jewish king became king, he stood by the pillar in the temple with his hand upon the law, and he made a covenant that he himself would walk with God, and the people a covenant that they would be loyal to him. The assumption of all politics in the Bible is God. It is for the praise of evildoer, or for the praise of good men and the restrictions of those who do evil. That's what Peter said. And so when a Christian goes into the voting booth, he is to look unto, is this the destruction of life in the womb? Is this the making sodomy a civil right that I do not have the right to refuse? Is this bringing sodomy into the local schools, the elementary, teaching it to my child? Is this the SOGI laws that sexual orientation has a freedom that I do not have the right to refuse? The book of Proverbs says that in the day of distress, if you cannot be weak in the day of distress because your strength is limited. When it's tough, that's when you have to stand. And the next verse says, deliver those who are being led away to death. Oh, hold them back. Do not say, I did not know this. Does not he know it who keeps your soul? And will he not call you unto judgment? It says, when you see evil, Proverbs says, you have to stand up. And so maybe we're not talking anymore about politics. We're talking about morality and the will of God. And it's like you say, if a guy can call himself a believer in the Savior who was testified to by the law and the prophets and explained by the New Testament, and I believe in him, and yet I regard human life as not that important. I regard law and order as not that important. I regard sexuality, morality, and gender as divorced from God. That is an extreme antinomy to be able to support that these contradictory ideas come together. And that is why I preached a message yesterday on Abimelech from Judges chapter 9 that is your first Canaanite, essentially, a Jew that adopts atheism and subdues the government and takes control. And when you read about him, he was judged for his evil and for his murder because he would not allow any challenge to his authority. But, buddy, the people that put him in power, they were the men of Shechem that put him there. And he came back on them, and God judged them through him because they were just as guilty as he was by putting him into power. And so when people take someone that is non-discretionary on murder and on sodomy and on law and order or on racism, he's going to be a classic challenge to racism, that a white shouldn't oppress a black, but then he'll turn right around on systemic racism and say a black can oppress a white, that I'm the oppressor because I'm white. When those things happen, those aren't political issues. Those are issues of the very righteousness of God, and of all the people that has to stand up, it's the Christian. And like Solomon said, if in the day of distress that you are faint, your strength is limited. It's like you have no strength at all if you faint when you've got to stand up.
You know, we've what we might call liberal churches have been engaged in this, and pastors preaching on it for decades. I mean, forever. That has not been as true among conservatives. Jerry Falwell brought in the moral majority,
right,
and that sort of got people focused a little bit. There was the Christian Coalition that got people focused, evangelicals focused a little bit. But some of that seems to have faded. Do you see it coming back now? Do you see this new? Do you see a renewed interest?
I do. And what excites me, buddy, is I see young people. I see Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens and Alan West. He's got a little gray on him, but he's younger than me. I see, help me out, Shannon Bream, Vodi Bakum. I see a lot of young people standing up. Whoever that kid was at the Republican National Convention that was in the wheelchair and stood up, that was running for office. I see a lot of young people standing up, and I think it was because Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson and a lot of them in the 70s saw what was coming in the worldview shift, especially with abortion, Roe versus Wade. And I think there has kind of been the Christian coalition has not been probably as strong as it was. But all of a sudden, whenever things in the last year, when there has come kind of a moral collapse, whenever the river has cut into the bank to where all of a sudden it collapses like it's done in the past 6 months, then that's when Christians have become alarmed and when they stand up. You know, when I was at Dallas Seminary, Dr. John Hanna once said that you can't really study prosukeology, the study of prosuke or a prayer, because Christians historically don't pray. And he said they will only pray whenever they are severely threatened, whenever there is terror in the gate, like in 1858 before the Civil War, the Layman's Prayer Revival, or in 1800 when Enlightenment thought was coming over and you have the Second Great Awakening, or in 1720 when there was all the stress coming up with England and Christians began to pray. And so he said that really you don't see great movements of Christians until they are deeply threatened. I think we saw it in the 70s, and all of a sudden another generation has come to power, and we are threatened again. And so all of a sudden Christians have raised up. For that matter, I think Fox has raised up with a lot of what I would call relatively young people. To you and I, buddy, they would seem young. To a lot of people, they wouldn't. But they look young to me, and they have stood up because they see it coming. If you are faint in the day of distress, your strength is limited.
That's a good place to end it on. My guest has been Tom Nelson. Tom, thank you so much for joining us. If you want to find out more about Tom Nelson, you can go to our website or you can go to Denton Bible Church. And also on the Point of View website, pointofview.net, we have a link to Tom's sermon yesterday, so you can go and take a listen to it. Tom, thank you so much.
Thank you, buddy.
When we come back, Carter Page.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome back. Merrill Matthews sitting in today for Kirby Anderson. And we're going now to the deep state. My guest this hour, or this half hour, is Carter Page. You have probably heard of him, but not because of his distinguished pedigree. I mean, he's a managing partner at Global Energy Capital in New York, and Global Natural Gas Ventures in Oklahoma City. He specializes in energy and foreign policy. He graduated with distinction from the U.S. Naval Academy, where he was a Trident Scholar. He holds an MBA from New York University Stern School of Business and an MA in National Security Studies from Georgetown University and a doctorate from the University of London's School of Oriental and African Studies. That is quite a pedigree, and yet most of what we know is what we've heard from the news, as they've branded him a collusion person with the Russians. Carter, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, great to be with you, Merrill. Thanks for having me.
I wanted to bring you on because so much is happening in the deep state that it's just almost a daily occurrence. I've got the Washington Post here, a story from December where it says Carter Page fought the law and the law lost, and it goes on to highlight that you were one of four campaign advisors to the Trump campaign. The FBI decided to go after you. You became a household name for a while there, but you ended up fighting this. The FISA court had a role in this. The FBI was a major player in this. We find out later that the FBI actually falsified documents that they gave to the FISA court to try to implicate you so that they could surveil you. It's amazing the stuff that we're finding out. 10, 20 years ago, I thought the FBI was a great organization that you could trust. I would have thought the same thing about the CIA, at least as an American. Donald Trump came along and said there's a deep state out there, and you can't trust these people, and we're learning that at least for some of them that's true, isn't it?
It is so true, Merrill. And unfortunately, there are just so many additional dimensions to this. And a lot of people have been fighting to get to the truth for a very long time. And I mean, even over the weekend, former director of national intelligence, Grinnell, he was on one of the Sunday shows, kind of talking about how, they've been, and he started that in terms of some of the declassifications. But it's been over 4 years since these criminal acts were committed against myself as a way of damaging then candidate Trump. And we still don't have the full truth. And unfortunately, we're coming down just around 4 weeks till the next election. And it's really essential that we get more information about these criminal acts that were taken to do as much damage as possible to candidate Trump, and then, throughout his transition and throughout the early years of his presidency as well.
It never stopped. Now, you wrote a book. It just recently, I think you released it in August, Abuse of Power, How an Innocent American Was Framed in an Attempted Coup Against the President. So give us a rough a quick outline of your story. What happened to you?
Well, I think, Merrill, from a big picture perspective, I was essentially, and along the lines of what you're just referring to, I was falsely accused, right? And they basically called me a traitor.
Mm-hmm.
And as we've come to find out over the years since, and particularly over the last year or so, is that the people that were committing these crimes are the real traitors. And, you know, part of the reason why I wrote this book is I think what happened to me, you know, should never be allowed to happen to anyone again. You know, and this has impacted so many people all the way up to the President of the United States. And, I mean, top officials within, as you say, the deep state and some of our once respected intelligence agencies, they abused their oath of office. And they abused our Constitution, right, as well. So I've just been fighting back to, not only just to fix my own life, but to, on behalf of all freedom-loving Americans, because it's a long, complicated spy story, but largely one that was made up. And, I think as when you read through my book, you'll see about, the fact of what was done to destroy any semblance of truth, justice, and the American way, but, just as a way of harming innocent people. And, as you correctly alluded to, it was largely driven by the mainstream media and, unfortunately, the Democrat Party.
And, sometimes within, say, for instance, the FBI, you could have two different agents having a different opinion about something. But it wasn't just that. There was an agent who actually falsified an email relating to you in order to try to make sure that the FISA court was going to allow them to continue their surveillance on you. I mean, they actually falsified documents. And I wondered when I saw this, how is this person even still here at the FBI? And I think now he's just taken a plea deal and he's leaving. But this is amazing stuff.
Yeah, it really is. And again, related to what we were just talking about of the cover-up, I mean, if you read the charging document for him back in the middle of August, I mean, the paragraph 5 on the second page, it talks about what happened in August 2016, again, over 4 years ago. And they talk about, the CIA providing, quote, certain members of the Crossfire Hurricane team a memorandum and related details about myself. And so it's a plural, it's a team. It's not just one individual. There are other people involved, and a lot more information needs to come out. And unfortunately, there's been a huge amount of stonewalling. So I'm hoping, again, that was an important first step that was taken with that initial charge, but there's certainly a lot more to this, I can assure you.
My guest right now is Carter Page. We found out about him as the FBI began investigating him because of his connection with President Trump, at that time candidate Trump, and of course they did it with several others, Michael Flynn, and I know Sidney Powell, and I've had her on the show here, but she keeps trying to get Michael Flynn off the hook as the Justice Department has wants to drop the charges and move on. And they can't get the judge to allow that to drop. It's amazing stuff. If you want to find out more about Carter Page, you can go to pointofview.net. We have information about him along with the bio on the website. And you should also look at his book, Abuse of Power: How an Innocent American Was Framed in a attempted coup against the president. So when we come back with Carter, we want to talk a little bit more about what we do about this deep state and if there's some way that we as Americans can change that situation. So stay with us, and we'll be back with Carter Page in just a minute.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
When
the Trump administration decided to cancel federal training sessions on critical race theory, you knew there would be criticism. What may be surprising is how easy it might be to respond to that criticism. For example, deans of the University of California Law School signed an open letter criticizing President Trump and his administration. And then Michael Brown wrote an open letter to these professors. Here are his first 2 points in his lengthy letter. First, the professors say they write with one voice. Brown asked whether such a unity of opinion should trouble you. Nearly all professors in the humanities and social sciences at American universities are left-wing. He also quotes one law professor who talks about how descriptions on positions were rewritten when the best applicants were right of center. No wonder these deans can speak with one voice. The liberal progressive voice is usually the only one allowed. Second, they complained that Trump decided to ban federal employees from learning about critical race theory through trainings. Brown responds that any federal worker can buy copies of White Fragility and meditate on the book over the weekend. Why should citizens of the U.S. pay to train federal employees in a controversial theory? Here's an even more relevant question. Why should we even be teaching critical race theory when it rests on neo-Marxist ideas? Lest you think that is too strong a statement, I would recommend that you take a moment and read one of the many articles being written by evangelical Christians on this race theory. Pastor John MacArthur has written about the theological errors of critical race theory. Professor Doug Groothuis also provides a powerful critique of critical race theory. We shouldn't be teaching this race theory and certainly shouldn't have U.S. taxpayers paying for it. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back. My guest this segment is Carter Page, former advisor to President Trump during the campaign, who became a target of the FBI. He has written a book about that, Abuse of Power, how the innocent American was framed in an attempted coup against the president. Carter, President Trump introduced this notion of the deep state. We found out that there is a deep state. He says he wanted to drain the swamp. I'm not sure he's got it drained completely. I would argue he's mostly stirred it up. I'm not sure it's been drained. What do we do about this? How do we change this situation?
Well, Merrill, I think it really comes down to demanding the truth. I think as all innocent Americans and all Americans who love our Constitution and our country, there are a lot of evil forces in that deep state working to destroy our duly elected president, and in doing so, destroy the U.S. Constitution and all of our institutions. And he has been stating, and I think everything that he talked about during his first presidential campaign, we're still in the process of learning and just seeing how correct he was over the years since, and to this very day. I mean, each week we keep learning more and more. And I'll give you just one example. Last week we had former FBI Director James Comey testifying in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And you remember back in March 2017, President Trump, in the early months of his administration, he talked about spying on Trump Tower.
Yes.
And he put out 4 tweets on a Saturday morning in early March. And unfortunately, what we've learned, although the FBI and many officials have tried to deny it over the years since, is that he was absolutely correct. My office is actually right next door to Trump Tower. I was through Trump Tower all the time. And the problem is, I mean, this is really the biggest, as he has correctly also noted, the biggest spy scandal and the biggest political scandal of history and of all time. And there's just so much more that keeps coming out and so much more that we still need to learn. But there's been several additional articles over recent days and weeks and months about how the cover-up continues, including the CIA director has been blocking, allegedly, some of the declassification. And there's similar complaints about our FBI director as well, just because it shows the extent and just how high up the chain this spy scandal went to interfere in a presidential campaign and really the essence of the American democracy.
You know, it's interesting because when President Trump made the accusation, he was widely ridiculed in the media and the left that would never happen. But there's been so many things where the president comes out and says something, it seems a little off the cuff, a little out of the norm, and a little bit far-fetched, and yet you find out 3, 6, 9 months later that if it wasn't exactly right, it was real close to being right, and he apparently was being monitored by the FBI then. It's amazing. Now, you had James Clapper, who was head of the CIA, I believe it was under Obama. He ended up lying to Congress. You have John Brennan, and these people get jobs on CNN after they leave the administration, even though they are under so much scrutiny for things that we would find questionable, if not flat, just outright wrong.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Merrill. Those are a couple of great examples of a lot of these former intelligence officials, top-level intelligence officials, then going to work for MSNBC, CNN, other liberally leaning news agencies. And another example is Andrew McCabe.
Yes.
And if you look him up, just over the last couple of days, he has said he was originally scheduled tomorrow on Tuesday to testify in front of the same committee that former FBI Director James Comey testified in front of. And even though Mr. McCabe has, been a CNN contributor, CNN analyst for some time now, he unfortunately has now tried to get out of that, saying, well, I don't want to come to your committee, with all kinds of excuses that don't make any sense, saying he's concerned about COVID, even though they did the Comey hearing was telecast via live stream from his home. So, I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever. And unfortunately, I think it's really important to note, Merrill, that it really represents just the continuation of 2 standards of justice in this country, where people who are on the wrong side of the political powers that be in terms of the conventional Washington establishment, of which President Trump has been fighting back against, they get one standard where they're just let off the hook completely. Whereas myself, I got subpoenaed multiple times, not only by the Senate, but also by the House of Representatives and, the Mueller witch hunt as well. So it's really a truly extraordinary story. And that's why, I wrote my book, Abuse in Power. And there's a lot more. We could talk for hours about this, but I hope you and your listeners, learn more about the full truth, because as you're correctly noting, Merrill, it's been just lie after lie from the mainstream media. Not only about this, but this is an early example, but it's just been a continuation. It's important that Americans know the truth.
you mentioned the scandal with the FBI. Jonathan Turley, a widely respected attorney, had a piece in the Hill, I think about 3 or 4 weeks ago, something like that. I'm a contributor to the Hill also, and I cited him there. But he went through and he listed some of these things, and he said, why is this, the FISA court lie and abuse and so forth, why is this not the major scandal that the media would be covering, that everybody would be outraged over, because it gets very little actual coverage out there?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And, I think, there's a lot of dimensions to this, as we've been talking about. And unfortunately, the court system is at the center of all this.
Yes.
Right? There is a secret court in Washington, totally top secret, called the U.S. Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. And never in the history, about 40-year history of this top secret court, was there ever disclosure of one of these warrants. And finally, just given the criminal activities surrounding my 4 warrants that were somehow put into this top secret court by the Democrats and the Obama-Biden administration, they were declassified. And unfortunately, as we've come to see, and similar to the fake news, which helped instigate these criminal acts, it's just totally false and lie upon lie. So, Professor Turley has been an important force, and I think he's absolutely right on this, but he's also been right about, the needs to reform our court system and, the steps that have been taken to interfere in that. And I think he's absolutely right in that sense as well. And it's another example of where this important historic story, which is not understood at all by most American citizens, really needs to be better understood as soon as possible.
And I'll just mention in closing that I believe the head of the FISA court said they're going to institute some changes to try to keep some of these things from happening in the future. My guest this hour has been this half hour, Carter Page. Carter was an advisor to the Trump campaign. The FBI decided to start surveilling him and ended up making a mess of things in it. And Carter ended up winning this because he fought back against it. There's others who didn't, and then we still got Michael Flynn, who's still in the process, and he may come out of this on top, but we don't know that yet. Carter, thank you so much for joining us. If you're interested in Carter's book, Abuse in Power: How an Innocent American Was Framed in an Attempted coup against the president, you can find that. I guess that just came out about 2 months ago, right?
Yes, just over a month ago, about a month and a half. Yep.
Very good. So you can go and get a copy of that, and I'd encourage you to do so. Thank you so much for joining us, Carter.
Great to be with you, Merrill. Thanks a lot for having me.
When we come back, we're going to turn to health care. Grace Marie Turner has signed a letter. I'm signed on to it about what we should be doing on health care reform.
(2020). It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kirby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
Welcome back. Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson today. And we are now going to change focus and go to healthcare reform. On the line with me is Grace Marie Turner. She is a longtime friend. She is the president of the Galen Institute. It's a public policy research organization, which she founded in 1995. So it's been around for about 25 years. Grace Marie has been involved in every major healthcare debate going on in the country for about 3 decades now. And what she really does is she serves as sort of the hub for all of those who are at the center, or who are basically market-oriented, free market healthcare people who want to try to make sure that we move the healthcare system to a consumer-driven healthcare system where individuals have more choice and the government is less involved in our healthcare. She's been at the center of that. The other organizations sort of revolve around her because she's sort of the coordinator of this. And she recently released a letter entitled "What's Needed for Healthcare Reform: Personalized Care That Puts You and Your Doctor in Charge." Has 10 points in that, and I wanted to bring her on to talk about that. Grace Marie, thank you for joining us.
Oh, Merrill, it's such a pleasure to be with you. We have been in these battles together for a long time, and I really have learned so much from you about as an economist and as a very insightful observer of the political world, and I'm so glad to be on the program with you today. And of course, my cell phone rings just as we begin. Now it's silent.
You mentioned how we've been doing this for a long time. I used to tell my children I've dedicated my life to trying to keep the government from taking over the healthcare system, so my children know their father is a failure because it has been.
You know what I think, though, Merrill? I think that had we not been doing what we have been doing for all of these years in trying to help the American people see there is an alternative, there is an option, we would not have health savings accounts. We wouldn't have health reimbursement arrangements. We wouldn't have the kinds of options that people have now, and the still solid employer-based health sector. So I think that we have preserved the freedom in our health sector as much as possible, and I think this election will determine which direction or which corner we turn after this. But I do believe that our success has been that the great majority of Americans are part of a free healthcare system.
I think that's right. We've stayed off the beast for the time being. We may not be able to keep it at bay forever, but we certainly have tried. So walk us through some of the points.
We're not going to give up. Yes.
Yeah. Walk us through. Number one, why did you decide to push to produce this, and walk us through some of the points in here.
Well, one of the things that just really is annoying is when we hear people say over and over and over again that conservatives don't have a health reform plan. Well, conservatives don't believe that you can have a plan to re-engineer our healthcare system from Washington in a different way than the other side does. We believe in freedom. We believe in targeted solutions. Find a problem. Let's develop a solution to solve that problem, and allowing sort of bottom-up reform, and that's how the market can respond. We saw it during the COVID crisis, when the government relaxed regulations at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level, and we saw this burst of energy from the market to do everything from producing ventilators to personal protective gear, to the incredible energy we've seen in the pharmaceutical sector to develop vaccines and treatments, and the innovations in being able to access your doctor through telemedicine. All of that is because the government is getting out of the way so the private sector can respond. And that's what we want to build on. And that's why we've developed this healthcare choices plan that now has 81 policy experts, yourself, many others from think tanks all over the country, to really say, here's our solution. It's not a new silver bullet. It's a complex, interactive series that puts doctors and patients back in charge of healthcare decisions.
And your first point on the letter is that you want to have people back in charge of their health insurance and being able to keep it when they change jobs, because we have an employer-based health insurance system. If I change my job, I often lose my health insurance, and that is, to a lot of us, that just doesn't seem to work right. We don't lose our life insurance. We don't lose our auto insurance. We don't lose our homeowner's policy. Why is it important to be able to have your own insurance?
Well, many people enjoy and they love their employer-based health insurance. It gives them security. But you're right. If people lose their jobs, if they change, if they want to move, they're scared about being able to keep their coverage. And so there need to be other options in this increasingly mobile society. One of the things that we call for specifically in our proposals is to make permanent the regulation that the president has created on health reimbursement arrangements. It's a complex term, but basically it's a 401k for health insurance, that your employer can fund an account that lets you buy the policy of your choice. You've got resources there to pay the premiums, to pay deductibles, to be able to then take this with you so you don't have to lose that policy. Remember when President Obama was talking about his health reform plan, the main selling point was if you like your plan, you can keep your plan.
Right.
So we've got to start with that as the premise. People want to keep their plans, but they want other choices, why we call it the Healthcare Choices Plan.
And essentially this doesn't end employer-based insurance. It just means the employer puts the money in an account for you as an individual. You could buy it if the employer provides a plan, you could do that, or you could go buy something else if you wanted to. Is that correct?
That's correct. Now, there's some limitations about what they could do through administrative authority, but Congress could give them many more options than that. They would have to currently buy a plan in the individual market. Well, we know that because of Obamacare, the individual market is not very functional.
It is not functional at all.
Have to follow all of the ridiculously complex prescriptions of Obamacare. We need deregulation. Give people more flexibility so they can have things like health sharing ministries, they can have direct primary care, and any infinite number of alternatives that the industry would come up with if they were allowed to respond to consumer needs, not Washington bureaucrats.
And your second point has to do with price transparency. And this is just so frustrating to me because the prices in healthcare, especially in hospitals, are I just call it a sham, because they make up prices that aren't really based upon their cost and so forth. They make up a price. They then negotiate with the insurance company. With drugs, they negotiate with the pharmacy benefit manager. They get those down. The only people who really pay the high price are the uninsured, who oftentimes can't afford it. And it's just we as consumers don't know what we're getting. We don't know what we're buying. And I've often said, if I were to go to a restaurant that didn't have any prices on the right-hand side, I wouldn't go to that restaurant.
Exactly right. And I've seen, Merrill, everything from prices for a COVID test from $100. I heard one the other day, $1,400, $2,000.
I have some friends who paid $2,000 a piece for it.
It's unbelievable. And that's simply because, imagine if you go to a grocery store and you don't see that there are no prices. Well, everybody, the first time they go, I think Senator Graham was one of the first ones to talk about this during Hillary Care. Everybody loads up their basket with filet mignon, right? Well, the next time you go, the filet mignon's already gone. Maybe you'll be lucky if you get hamburger meat the next time. But when people don't know prices, they overconsume. We absolutely overconsume healthcare. Why on earth should every small bill that you have going to the doctor because you need an allergy shot, why should that go through health insurance? Let people have resources and money, health savings accounts, to health reimbursement arrangements so that they can have a pool of money they can spend on their routine care and then make sure they've got good protection. If their bills, if they have to go to the hospital, they get injured, they need a surgery, that's when you need insurance. If you have insurance for all the small stuff, it drives up the prices. And you're right, even for small things, the prices can be wildly inflated because people don't see them.
Senator Graham, who was a PhD economist, used to say, if I paid for food the same way I pay for health care, I would eat better, and so would my dog.
I loved that line. It was so great.
So
true.
My guest is Grace Marie Turner of the Galen Institute. If you want to know more about her, go to pointofview.net. We have her bio there. We have a picture, and we have information about how to get in touch with her. When we come back, we'll continue going through some of the issues that she points out in this letter that she sent in order to try to create a more market-oriented system for health care rather than going the direction of Obamacare or, worst of all, Medicare for all. We'll be back in just a minute.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back. Merrill Matthews with Grace Marie Turner from the Galen Institute, and we're talking about health care reform. And Grace Marie, your fourth point, we were just talking about how prices in the healthcare system are just something of a sham right now. And they're going to stay that way until I, as an individual, benefit from making the choice, so that if I ask the doctor, the brand name drug or generic drug, until I am sort of have some skin in the game, I'm probably not going to care about those prices. And when you get to the fourth point, you talk about how it benefits you by being able to make choices for higher quality, lower cost. You get to make those choices.
That's exactly right, Merrill. And it's all about incentives. Certainly knowing the price is important, and people want to know that, but they have to have a reason to shop and to take action. If you know you're going to save $300 out of your own pocket because you've searched for a better, maybe lower cost MRI in your neighborhood, then that gives you an incentive to really force the market to push prices down. Obviously, quality needs to be part of that equation, but Americans are good at that. Americans are good at forcing the market to come up with something that is faster, better, cheaper, and there's no incentive for consumers, 300 million consumers in the country, to be engaged in shopping for better prices unless they have those incentives. So we think that that's really crucial, and that involves, once again, people being able to not only control their spending on health care and their out-of-pocket costs, but also the kind of health insurance they have to make sure that meets their needs, not some Washington bureaucrats dictate.
That's an interesting point, because my wife had been in an individual market. That's where she went out and bought her own policy. It was a Blue Cross policy, and we were happy with it. I mean, it wasn't cheap, but we felt like it was within the budget. And then along comes Obamacare, and she has to drop that policy, and she goes to another one that's Obamacare approved. It was much more expensive and not nearly as good, even though it was the same insurance. And it gets back to this issue of we as individuals, we like certain doctors. We may have certain medical needs, and we want to go to this doctor or this hospital or that clinic because they're good at that. And the way we have to do insurance, we simply can't always do that because of the kind of insurance we're given. We can't make those kinds of choices.
That's exactly right, Merrill. And when Washington is in charge of deciding what we need rather than us, then you find exactly what your wife did, where they found that she was paying more for a policy that not only provided less access to the top physicians, the top cancer centers in Texas, no doubt, that thank heaven she doesn't need. But if you look at the quality of the product is worse because they're trying to dictate from Washington that we all have to have a one-size-fits-all benefit package. Well, that doesn't work for people. And people have deductibles so high that they say they might as well not be insured. They say, I'm paying all this money for this health insurance policy, but it doesn't kick in until after I spent the first $6,000, $8,000, $10,000 on my care. No way I can afford that. So they basically feel they're still uninsured, even though they're shelling out a lot of money on premiums.
It's such an interesting point, because back in the 1990s and early 2000s, when I was talking about, well, we ought to go to a health savings account and a high deductible policy, I was talking about in the neighborhood of $2,000 for an individual, maybe $2,500 for a family. And Democrats always came up and said, you must be in the pockets of the insurance company because you want people paying premiums, and the insurance company gets a pass for the first $2,500. I would have never said something like a $7,000 or $8,000 deductible.
No, it's completely off our charts. I cannot tell you. I was in so many debates, and leading up to Obamacare, where people said, "You with your HSAs, you're giving somebody an 8-foot rope in a 12-foot hole." Well, guess what? They're giving them a 2-foot rope in a 12-foot, in a 14-foot hole. I mean, they completely got it wrong. And it's because they don't understand or appreciate markets. They don't understand that people are going to, as best they can, act in their own interest. And what's happened is too many people are taking advantage of all the rules and regulations in the health sector as a result of Obamacare, rather than having the market think, what do people want? What can they afford? And how can we create that product that meets their needs?
And the amazing thing is when you saw the presidential debates from among the Democrats, every one of the Democrats complained about the healthcare system, saying we need to make changes, we need to go to Medicare for all, or we need to add elements to the Affordable Care Act. But the point that no not one of the anchors ever said was, wait a minute, this health care plan that you're criticizing so much, that's the Affordable Care Act. That's what you said was going to be so great, and that you passed it saying it's going to address all these needs, and now you're doing nothing but complaining about it, saying we've got to move to something else.
And, I think that Vice President Biden's health plan, which is basically to fix Obamacare, is an implicit acknowledgement that it's not working. We've got to go back to the drawing board again and throw tens of billions more dollars at this plan and create the government option, the public option, so that we'd have government even more in control of the health sector. I mean, they are admitting implicitly that what they created didn't work, and they're thinking, well, if you just let us control it all, then we can fix it. I don't think so.
And what we should be saying is the Obama-Biden care plan, because it was Biden who was there. So what do you think is the key point of your letter here? What's the key thing that we need to do?
Well, I think mostly people need to understand is there is a robust alternative to Medicare for all, the public option, Medicare for some, whatever the other side is talking about. All of that means larger government control, creation of more problems from Washington, and consumers having less and less power over their own health care decisions and the kind of care they get and how much they have to pay for this. We are providing an alternative. We're saying we want to devolve power away from Washington through the states to individuals with a lot of different options for people to get care and coverage that they can keep, and to incentivize the market to provide the faster, better, cheaper options that it's literally frozen from doing now because the market is so controlled from Washington. So it's saying we have an alternative. It's not a silver bullet, but it's the right answer.
And echoing P.J. O'Rourke, if you think health care is expensive now, wait till the government makes it free.
Indeed. Right. We want to empower innovators. We want to empower doctors and patients and hospitals and every other player in the health sector to reform this health care from the bottom up. That's the only way it's going to work. We've tried every single way for Washington top-down solution, and it's all failed, implicitly acknowledged by Joe Biden in saying we're going to fix it again. No, we're not. The only way it's going to be fixed is by patients and doctors in the marketplace working together with the kind of incentives that you talked about earlier.
Thank you for joining me. My guest has been Grace Marie Turner. She is president of the Galen Institute. If you want to find out more about the Galen Institute, you can go to pointofview.net or galen.org. Also, we have the letter that she has sent out with the 10 points for reform. So you can go there and look at that, and you'll see what we're talking about and things that would really sort of move the healthcare system in a more market-oriented approach. Thank you so much, Grace Marie.
Pleasure, Merrill. Thank you so much.
And I want to thank Andrew and Steve for manning the controls. I'll be back tomorrow, and we're going to be talking about intelligent design. We're going to take 2 hours tomorrow to have some of the country's leading experts on intelligent design, not the same as creationism, but intelligent design, to talk about the issues of the creation and whether or not we have reason to believe that there is intelligence behind the creation of the universe. Thank you, and join us tomorrow.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/sign-up. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.